Hello, my name is Scribbles, coach of the Colorado Cobalions, and this is a draft recap of my team for this season's Mount Silver Draft League. So this year had a couple interesting changes to the rules with the release of Sword and Shield. I'm just going to go over those really quick so that we're all on the same page going into the draft, and you can adequately criticize any of the choices that I've made. This year we're going to 64 members, which is what we had previously. The difference this time is that rather than splitting into kind of tiered divisions we had last year with Mystery Egg, Pupitar, Larvitar, Tyranitar, not necessarily in that order, we're going to go into 8 conferences with kind of all skill levels kind of mixed in. I ended up in the Mount Silver West Conference. This should be a good change. I think it's going to really improve scheduling, which has been an issue with people kind of scattered all over the place. We're grouped geographically, so in theory, you're playing people that are in similar time zones as you. So I think that should really help. The playoffs will be determined kind of by a selection committee. So we've got a little bit of a theme kind of mimicking the NCAA, college football setup. So that should be interesting to see how that comes down towards the end of the season. In addition to that, the draft will be a points-based draft with a maximum of 11 Pokemon and 110 points. So if you're budgeting, that's about 10 Pokemon, or 10 points per Pokemon, which is pretty low when you start looking at some of the prices, which we'll get to in a second. Each team is allowed 3 free agent moves and 5 trades. These tend to go pretty quickly. 3 is pretty low. I like it this way so that you're not able to kind of cater your team to matchups each week, but it's something you have to kind of be on top of and really try not to waste those moves. We're using a National Dex format, so it's not only Pokemon in Sword and Shield, so Dexit hasn't happened in Mount Silver as of yet. Dynamax and Gigantamax are banned. They somewhat format breaking, really difficult in Draft League. I definitely supported this decision. Mega Z moves are banned, so we're playing under kind of Sword and Shield pseudo rules. You can't obtain those items in the game for Sword and Shield. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting bridge. I think I like this decision because we've never played without Megas or Z moves, or at least I haven't, so it'll be interesting to do that. Deleted moves from Sword and Shield are banned. The most notable of these is Hidden Power. I think Return, Frustration, Hidden Power, and Pursuit are the main ones. There's other things like Natural Gift, so some memes died alongside those moves. But Hidden Power is really impactful for the metagame. You're not able to kind of tech on coverage for free, basically. There is a little bit of a caveat here, and this one's a little bit hard to explain. Any post-home or bank moves are allowed, so certain Pokemon have access to certain moves in Sword and Shield, even if they're not currently within Sword and Shield. An example of this is, I think the Kyurem forms get access to Dragon Dance, for instance. So you can't get the Kyurem forms in Sword and Shield, but they can learn Dragon Dance now. There's a few other things, and I've kind of kept an eye on this during the draft. One thing to kind of jump into here, which I think most people are probably interested in, is the point totals for Pokemon. So I'll go through this really quick and discuss some of my strategy looking at the draft. I was under the impression that new Pokemon would be very popular. Kind of a new toy. You want to be the first one to use it. You want to find out if it's broken or not. So looking at the draft, I ended up with 4th pick overall. I think that's pretty important. Being in the middle with an 8-man draft, it's not as impactful. I didn't really want 4th pick. I kind of wanted to either be at the front or the end. Right in the middle isn't my favorite. But looking at the draft board, I didn't want to make any plans. I don't think having a full teams figured out going into a draft is ever the best thing. I think it's nice to be able to pivot. And, when something slips and you want to select it, go ahead and take that to kind of build around Pokemon that you select as you go. I think is really strong. Like I said, going into it, I expected new Pokemon to be very popular. My prediction was that Cinderace, Darmanitan, Galarian form, and Dragapult would be top picks. Whether or not they warranted that, I think they would have gone really high. Kind of an interesting inclusion that you can see here is Lando I is legal again, which is also a very strong Pokemon. You have Tapu Koko and Landorus Therian form, both very, very strong. Celesteela, very strong. There's a lot of really strong Pokemon available. The Pokemon I was most interested in for 1st pick was Dragapult. I used Zeraora last year. Having that speed tier, Dragapult is actually 1 point slower than Zeraora. but having something that fast is incredibly valuable for team building. It forces your opponent's Scarfers to be faster than they want to outspeed you. You can run Adamant Modest very easily. So Dragapult was kind of what I was eyeing for first pick. I actually wasn't very interested in Galarian Darmanitan at all. I thought Cinderace was good. Lando I is very good. Tapu Koko is very good. Basically, Dragapult, Cinderace, Landorus I, Tapu Koko, any of those four I'd be fine with taking. And kind of hope someone grabbed Darmanitan Galarian form ahead of me. Beyond that, things that jumped out to me looking at the prices initially, Zeraora jumped all the way up to 16. I think it was at 13 last season when I drafted it. I still like its value at 16. I think its speed tier is amazing, its coverage is amazing, physical and special setup, just a litany of sets that it can run. I think any Pokemon with a 4x weakness gets a little bit more interesting with Hidden Power gone. Lando I not having to worry about Hidden Power Ice, Lando T not having to worry about Hidden Power Ice, Zygarde not having to worry about it, Garchomp, so I guess all of the Ground Dragon, Ground Flying. But other Pokemon, Heatran I think becomes a little bit more interesting, not having to worry about a 4x weakness. Volcarona doesn't really have to think about that. Kartana is pretty interesting. No Hidden Power Fire makes it, it makes it so that there's not every single special attacker has the option to OHKO it. Ferrothorn can take fire hits anyway. So that's something I was keeping an eye on. Other than that, I didn't really see too many Pokemon that were ridiculously priced. I think Conkeldurr probably could have gone up in price. So I had it last season, performed really well. I got access to quite a few new moves, so I think I could have seen it bumping up a little bit. Aside from that, the Pokemon I'm most in place to comment on are ones that I've owned. Krookodile, I think when you remove Z moves, which is another thing to kind of think about looking at these prices, I think removing Z moves really hurts Krookodile. It has good coverage, but it doesn't really have quite enough to break through with that coverage. And a lot of its coverage moves aren't particularly useful in and of themselves. So a good example of that is Focus Punch as a Z move is amazing. As a regular move, it's really tough. Going through, you can see the new Pokemon sprinkled throughout. Parascuda, Dracovish. Nothing too crazy the rest of the way. The other thing I really like to look at when I'm looking at a draft board is some of the cheaper options in terms of viable Pokemon. I only scroll through the $1 Pokemon to see if there's anything viable. I didn't see anything great. Occasionally you'll get something that's usable. I think they did a good job of pulling out anything even potentially viable from this tier. So maybe Zweilous, I don't know. they're all pretty weak, so didn't look too much at that. The $2 tier, I think there's a lot of decent ones at $2. Wigglytuff's pretty good. I used Stantler very briefly. I don't think it's actually any good, but I've used it. Kukumuku has functionality as a baton pass user, which you can dry pass in this league. Mischievous is a really nice EV-Light user. Mordrum should get Prankster. Lapras is, I think it gets Aurora Veil now. I don't know exactly. Dracloak still has a really nice speed tier. It does get Infiltrator and a few other cool things, so maybe that's usable. I've wanted to use Drifloon before, but I don't think it's actually any good. So nothing too crazy in the $2 tier, so it might not be wise to go for a complete budget approach. I don't think there's too much more to glean from looking at a huge list of Pokemon, so I think from here I'll just go ahead and pivot and jump back into the draft discussion. So pivoting back to the draft board, as I mentioned earlier, I ended up 4th pick. I expected a lot of the new Pokemon to go early, and it turns out I was pretty much right on that. There's a nightmare scenario, I think, for the draft board. Something like Cinderace, Dragapult, and then Lando I going would put me in a really bad position. I didn't want to have to choose between Tapu Koko, Galarian Darmanitan, and Celesteela. I think Tapu Koko got a lot worse with the loss of Hidden Powers. I don't particularly think Galarian Darmanitan is very good. It's kind of a one-trick pony. I don't know, that's something you want to pick super, super early. And then Celesteela just has never really excited me, as I know it's really good, but I just don't have the desire to build around it. So the draft kind of went as I expected. First pick was PZZ, ended up going with Cinderace. Second pick went to Wolverine97, who took Galarian Darmanitan, and at this point I knew I was going to get something that I wanted to get. Third pick was to Joey. He selected Dragapult, and I was kind of bummed. I really, really wanted to start this team with Dragapult. So it came to me with fourth pick, and I think the only real option for me here was Landorus Incarnate, Landoi. Landoi is an amazing Pokemon. It's banned in a lot of draft leagues just because sheer force combined with a really, really good move pool. Passable bulk, 89, 90, 80 is pretty good. B tier, 101. It's not great, but it does outpace a lot of Pokemon that kind of slot in that 90 to 100 range. It's pretty much every Uber Pokemon, every legendary Pokemon tends to end up right about in that range. It's usable, physical, or special. It can do both really well. It can do mixed sets really well. It has options for setup. So just kind of going down the list of some of the moves that it gets. It gets bulk up and calm mind, so physical or special setup. It can run Rock Polish to set up speed. It can run Sword Stance. It's pivoting in the form of U-turn. It gets Stealth Rocks. Let's see here, for special coverage, it has Ground, Psychic, Fighting, Grass, Poison. All very usable, all very good moves. It also gets some, niche moves. Losing Hidden Power hurts a little bit, but it's not the end of the world. And then from the physical side, it gets Ground, Normal, Fighting, Dragon, Dark. It gets Knockoff, which a lot of Pokemon lost Knockoff transitioning to this generation. Also gets Rock. It has U-turn, as I mentioned earlier. It has usable. It has Smackdown and Gravity also to allow it to hit with its stab attacks. No great flying coverage is a little bit annoying. But as far as the Pokemon goes, I think Landoi is really broken. I think not having to worry about Hidden Power Ice makes this a really, really strong first pick. It's super flexible as it can fit into a lot of different builds. Just a great, great wall breaker. One thing it loses over a few other wall breaking Pokemon. Most of the wall breakers were Megas. A lot of the really good ones. You get like Mega Medicham, Mega Gallade. It doesn't have any priority, which is a little bit of a problem, but it's an amazing Pokemon. I'm really, really happy to take it with first pick. So then going back towards the draft, after me, Melmetal was selected by Hat, and then Tapu Koko went off the board to Frost, and Zygarde went to Winter Weather Gamer, and then at the wheel, the 14th Doctor selected Gliscor and Kyurem. Kyurem picking up Dragon Dance is really interesting. Gliscor is super strong rocker, nice defensive pivot, can do a lot of things for a team. Then kind of coming back up the draft board for me, a couple water types went off the board. Manaphy, Weather Gamer, Dracovish to Frost. Hydreigon the pick before me. Hydreigon got a few new tools this gen. I think it picked up Nasty Plot, or maybe it picked up Dragon Dance. I think it got a couple new moves. It looked pretty cool to me. Obviously, I didn't get a chance to draft it. So it comes back to me, and at this point, I'm just looking for something that kind of synergizes decently well with Landoi. I'm not looking to build any particular archetype right now. I ended up going with Zeraora. It's a Pokemon I used last season. It's a Pokemon I'm really comfortable with. I love its speed tier. Very similar to Landoi, that it can run physical and special. It got a few move pool buffs this gen. I can bring those up really quick. So this gen, it picked up Aura Sphere, and that doesn't seem like a great move. But when you have to rely on Focus Blast as your fighting coverage for special, having Aura Sphere is huge. It's a much more reliable move, and the decrease in damage isn't quite as noticeable because you're probably going to be running a Calm Mindset if you're going to be running Zeraora especially biased. It also picked up Play Rough, which is interesting from a physical side, give you a little bit more coverage on that side. It lost Knockoff, which is a bit of a bummer. You still have dark coverage with Brutal Swing and Throat Chop. You probably run Throat Chop in almost every circumstance. Brutal Swing is more of a doubles move. So it didn't lose dark coverage, but it lost utility with not having Knockoff. And it also lost Z-moves. So Zeraora is really good from a setup perspective. Its speed tier is amazing. It does struggle to break a little bit. The attack and special attack, I think you can effectively think of them as 10% higher because you can always run a boosting nature. Almost always run a boosting nature. So, if you think of it as 123 attack and, 112 special attack, it's a little bit better. It's not quite as good as Lando Eye because Lando Eye has Sheer Force, which is, instead of a 1.1 boost for nature, it's basically a 1.3 boost to its attack and special attack. It's still really good. There's a little bit of synergy between Lando Eye and Zeraora. Obviously, Lando Eye can switch in on ground attacks, which is Zeraora's only weakness. I have 2 electric immunities now between the 2 of them, which I think is really good. Really discourages Volt Switch, pivoting, things like that. I just think Zeraora is a really great mon, and I think it can do a lot of different things on a team, and I'm comfortable using it, which there aren't many Pokemon in Draft League that I feel comfortable with at this point. So going back to the draft, after this, Celesteela went right after me, followed up by Corviknight, so a couple Flying Steels, which, after getting an electric type, I'm pretty comfortable with that. Back to PZZ on the wheel, and it takes Tornadie and Excadrill. So Tornadie, Excadrill, and Cinderace, really strong team starting there. Somewhat frustrating. I hope that he doesn't get Tyranitar at this point. But Tyranitar is really not fitting well on my team at the moment, so I don't know if there's anything I can do to prevent that. Coming back down, Wolverine picks up Suicune, who I loved using last season. It actually got bumped up a little bit in price, and without Z-moves, it's harder to break it, so I think it's a good pick. Joey picks up Weavile, which is one of the few really good ice types, and it comes back to me. So at this point, there's a ton available. I had a rocker in Lando Eye, but I really wanted to solidify my hazard game. Like I mentioned earlier, Zeraora isn't great at breaking. It kind of needs a little bit of help. It needs, passive chip, basically, to pick up sweeps a lot of times. So I wanted a rocker. I had it down to Jirachi or Ferrothorn as a pickup. It was basically a toss-up for me. Let's just go to the pick. I ended up selecting Jirachi. I liked being able to pick up additional utility. So Jirachi can do rocks. Jirachi can be an offensive threat. Jirachi can provide wish support, healing wish support. Jirachi can do a ton of different things. Great bulk, super customizable. It's not quite Mew, but it's close. It has pretty good typing with Steel Psychic. I am stacking a couple ground weaknesses, but I do have a ground immunity in Lando High, so it's not the worst thing. Yeah, I was comfortable with Jirachi. I think Ferrothorn would have been a good pick as well. Ferrothorn a little bit cheaper than Jirachi. Stacking up on some expensive Pokemon, so that might hurt me later in the draft. But like I said, I haven't used Jirachi before. I know Jirachi's very, very solid mon. It's getting pretty late here in the draft, so this is pick 20-ish, I'd have to think, right? So 8, 16, yeah, about 20. Getting Jirachi at pick 20 seemed really good value to me. I know it's a great mon. I don't have a lot of experience with it. We'll see how it goes. I like the utility it provided the team. So from there, the pick after me was Rillaboom to Hat, and then Frost selected Ferrothorn. And it's funny, Frost ended up indicating that he was deciding between Jirachi and Ferrothorn himself, so neither one were going to make it back to me if I didn't take them here. I guess I kind of locked myself in at this point. Following that up, Winter Weather Gamer selected Tangrowth. Goes to PZZ, he takes Seismitoad and Scizor. 2 really strong Pokemon. Sorry, that was a substitute pick. Those are going to the 14th Doctor, Seismitoad and Scizor. Seismitoad, a great rocker. Water Absorb is a great ability. Scizor, probably one of the best priority users. So, strong picks for sure. Goes to Winter Weather Gamer, he selects Toxtricity. And then Frost gets Lando T, because Lando T is still available. So far, the teams I like the best are Frost and PZZ. But I think there's a lot of strong teams right now. It's an 8-man draft. There's going to be a ton of really good Pokemon. From there, it goes to Hat, who selects Toxapex, and it comes back to me. And I select Gyarados. Gyarados got Power Whip, and it's kind of been doing a lot of work in the early kind of Dynamax meta on Smogon. But I don't think Gyarados is amazingly stronger than he was previously, but I did really like the synergy that Gyarados provided my team. So Gyarados is a ground immunity for Jirachi and Zeraora, so that gives me a switch there. I have 2 electricity immunities in Zeraora and Lando I. All 3 of my Pokemon, I forgot to mention this for Jirachi, can pivot. So this gives me a lot of opportunity to get Gyarados in to set up. Gyarados, in and of itself, doesn't do much. But with setup, Gyarados is terrifying. The ability Moxie, along with Dragon Dance on a water type, which is a very difficult type to wall defensively, with just enough coverage. Picking up Power Whip was huge, so the most reliable way to check Gyarados was a bulky water type. Having Power Whip as a coverage option gives it a way to break through those bulky water types. So I felt the fit with Gyarados was really, really strong in my team. Like, strong enough that I was tempted actually to go Lando I, Zeraora into Gyarados, because I really like the synergy of those 3. I think Jirachi also just builds upon that synergy, so I'm really liking the fit of my first 4. In and of themselves, I think they can have tough matchups, and I wanted to patch up some of those weaknesses, get a little more diversity in the team, but I'm really happy to pick up Gyarados here. After Gyarados, Celebi, Garchomp, Necrozma, and T-Tar go to PZZ, so PZZ team is looking basically broken at this point. Reuniclus to Wolverine, Phalanx goes to Joey, and then it comes back to me. And I make a pick here with this it's a new Pokemon, and it's a Pokemon I'm really excited about using, which is Galarian Weezing. So Galarian Weezing is Weezing very small stat distribution changes. It picks up Fairy typing, which is useful defensively. It has Toxic Spikes, which I think is huge for a Zeraora team. Aside from that, it has an amazing ability in Neutralizing Gas. So Neutralizing Gas nullifies the abilities of other Pokemon, which is really strong. So I have a lot of setup on the team. So something like Ditto, for instance. Galarian Weezing can switch in and prevent it from transforming. Galarian Weezing can prevent Prankster from existing. Galarian Weezing could stop Lando I's Sheer Force from working. It can prevent Intimidate. It can prevent any ability. It can be really strong. Aside from that, it also has Levitate, which nullifies one of its largest weaknesses to ground type. It also gets Misty Terrain, which could be really interesting with either a Misty Seed or just setup in general for my team if they can avoid being statused. A bit of a Nombo with Gyarados, obviously, but it's really interesting, and I really wanted a Toxic Spiker, and I think Galarian Weezing is probably the best Toxic Spiker, in my opinion, available. So that with Zeraora, I think, is a really good combination. After that in the draft, Sandaconda, Infernape, Swellow, Rotom Heat, Sylveon, Aromatisse, Slowbro, Palisand, and it comes back to me. And I ended up selecting Serena with this pick. So Serena gives me a Rapid Spinner, so Rapid Spin got buffed this gen, and now provides a +1 speed. I think Serena can use that +1 speed to great effect. In addition to that, Serena gives me a Grass type, which is a resistance to ground. I don't really have a lot of resistance. It's kind of a binary between immune or dies to ground. Serena's attack gives me a physical attacker, which I've got quite a few of. basically, I drafted Serena last season. I think I brought it 1 week, and it did absolutely nothing for me, and I ended up dropping it. But I do think it got some good buffs this gen in the form of basically Rapid Spin, getting +1 speed. And I like the Pokemon in theory. I think it's a good Z-move user, so I think it went down a little bit there. I don't know, I just want to make it work, and I think having a Rapid Spinner on a team that's focused around hazards is really important. So that's the pick I ended up going with. After that, the selections, Jellicent, Brizion, Dracozolt, Tangela, Moltres, and Donphan. So Donphan was another good spinner, but I obviously already had a ground type. So it comes back to me, and I ended up selecting Rotom. You want a Rapid Spinner on a team with hazards, and you want a Spin Blocker. And Rotom's a good Spin Blocker. I like the speed tier. All the other Rotom forms, aside from Heat, were available. They don't block Rapid Spin, so I went with Rotom Heat. With Rotom getting access to Nasty Plot, I think Rotom Heat is in a pretty good position to be able to threaten more quickly than the other Rotom forms, just because of its slight boost in speed. None of them are offensive powerhouses as is, but I think it's interesting being able to set up and have a little bit of speed and spin block. Good coverage, has a lot of moves. I don't have too much to say about Rotom. I just felt I needed a spin blocker. So after Rotom gets selected, went through Boltone, Obstagoon, Alolan Persian, Polteageist, Victini, Cobalion, Cryogonal, Volcarona, and then back to me. At this point, I have a good physical wall in Galarian Weezing. I felt I needed a special wall, and one of the things that I really wanted to be able to do with this team was allow Jirachi to have a bit of freedom in terms of the roles it filled. So I wanted to make the roles it could serve redundant on the team. So I ended up selecting Vaporeon because it gives me a Wish Passer, so that Jirachi doesn't have to do that on the team at all times. And also gives me a pretty good special wall. I don't really have one up to this point. Serena's okay-ish, but grass typing's not great. Jirachi, kind of similar, it's okay-ish, but it can be overwhelmed. I think Vaporeon gives me a lot of defensive synergy with the team, gives me a Wish Passer, gives me a Cleric, so Jirachi doesn't have to do that. Serena doesn't necessarily have to do that. I like Vaporeon here. Gives me a special attacker for water, in addition to Gyarados being a physical attacker. I think Vaporeon does a lot for the team. Continuing on the draft, Salazzle, Bisharp, Frostmoth, Girder, Avalugg, Licky Licky, and back to me. And this is a pick that I think Houndoom's one of my favorite Pokemon. So I selected Houndoom. Houndoom has pretty good switch synergy with a lot of my team. Being immune to fire types helps Jirachi. Resisting Dark helps Jirachi. It's weak to ground, which is a little bit unfortunate. The other thing I noticed about this draft in general, I think Dark types are a pretty decent premium. There aren't a ton of them available. I remember looking through it about the time I got to Rotom and realizing that there just weren't that many grass types that I really wanted to have on my team, or dark types that I really wanted to have on my team. So, really happy to go with Houndoom here. I think it pairs really, really nicely with Zeraora and Lando Eye. Also with Jirachi, as I mentioned. I don't think it's the best fit. I think there's probably better fits. But I really like Houndoom, and I wanted to use it in Draft League at some point. And so at this point in the draft, I'm down to 2 points. That was another thing that kind of dictated my pick here. I didn't like any of the 1-point Mons, so 5 was basically the max I could do. So with my last $2, I selected Wigglytuff. Wigglytuff, okay, does Stealth Rock, does Wish, which, free up Jirachi, as I mentioned earlier with Vaporeon. It's a Fairy type, which, along with Galarian Weezing, is kind of nice for the dragons. It picks up a lot of useful resistances. It has usable special attack and really good move pool. Its abilities are pretty good. Competitive is nice. Frisk is really good for scouting your opponent. I think Wigglytuff isn't good. I don't think it's good. But I think it is undervalued for just $2. And I think it did round out my team pretty nicely. Overall, like I said, I got a few sweepers, I got some hazard stack, I've got some kind of anti-hazard removal. I kind of like the direction of the team. I think there's a lot of flexibility in it. It's not I don't think I like this team as much as I liked my team last season, right at the draft. But I think it can do a lot of fun things, and I think it's really tough to build against. So kind of moving forward from here, I just want to take a quick look at the speed tiers, because this is something that I definitely did draft around, and it's something I think is important to draft around. I guess I forgot to go through the rest of the draft. Other Pokemon that were drafted, Ursula, Galarian Corsola, Galarian Mr. Mime, Vileplume, Frogadier, Coalossal, Ariados, Hatterini, Meowstic, Weezing, Swirlix, Diancie, Komala. And that's the complete draft. Anyway, going back to my speed tiers, I think it's important to have really good coverage across your Pokemon. And the reason for that is just to make investment for your opponent difficult. It's part of the reason I really like Zeraora. It's part of the reason I really want to Dragapult, is you don't really have to think about investment too much. You can basically run whatever you want to run for Zeraora in terms of speed. You can just go max to kind of punish people for speed creeping you. You can just outspeed their fastest Pokemon. There's a bunch of stuff you can do. The one thing I always try to do with my teams is not ever have a gap of more than 15 or more points. And the reason for that is that gap allows Pokemon to go from having to run speed boosting natures to being able to run attack boosting natures. So, for instance, if you have Jirachi and your opponent has Raikou, Jirachi's at base 100, Raikou's at base 115. A modest Raikou can outspeed a timid Jirachi. So that gives them 10% more damage output, basically, than they would have otherwise. It can't outspeed a Lando Eye, so they either have to make the choice to not outspeed or lose that 10% damage. And obviously all these investments come up differently, but I kind of like to keep that in mind. I like to have a really nice spread of speed tiers. So in this case, I've got speed tiers going from Zeraora up at 143, who you can effectively think as being at the 128, because I'm pretty much always going to be running Adamant or Modest. But then from there, I think the spread, so what's shown here is the possible speeds from uninvested to max investment, and you can just drop the kind of, I guess, non-speed boosting nature, a little bit towards the right of this. But basically, there's a huge amount of overlap in all the possible speeds that my Pokemon can run. And I think this makes team building for my opponents difficult. I think it makes team building for me a little bit easier, because I can kind of cater my team around the speed tiers that I want to use. So it's something interesting to think about when team building. I think this is really helpful for me. I drafted with this in mind, I think a few picks. I didn't use this as the end-all for drafting, but it was a tiebreaker in some circumstances. I think Jirachi over Ferrothorn was a good example of one that I went with the Pokemon I thought was better in Jirachi, even though Ferrothorn would have been much better overall for my speed tiers. You can see they're clustered up a bit there. That's it for the draft. I'd like to remind everyone that I'm going to be doing weekly videos with summaries of my battles. So definitely stay tuned. If you have any questions, if you want to ask me about any of my picks, feel free to do so in the comments below. And see you next time.